Skyrim is a world that usually makes sense. You follow a road, you find a ruin, you clear it, and you move on. Everything has a purpose, everything has a direction. But then there are places that don't quite fit, locations that feel disconnected, layouts that loop in ways they shouldn't, stories that start and never fully finish. These aren't the biggest or most dangerous places in the game. They're the ones that leave you standing there thinking, wait, what was this supposed to be? Because not every part of Skyrim is clear. Some places feel unfinished, some feel intentionally vague, and others feel like they're hiding something, but never actually tell you what it is. And those are often the most memorable, because confusion more than anything else sticks with you. There are cities in Skyrim that feel immediately understandable. Whiterun is open and honest. Solitude is political but structured. Windhelm is divided but clear in its tensions. And then there's Markarth, a city that, the longer you spend in it, the less sense it seems to make. Not because it lacks detail, but because it has too much of it, layered in ways that never fully align. Markarth is one of the most confusing places in Skyrim, not due to its layout alone, but because everything about it, its history, its politics, its people, feels like it's operating on multiple contradictory levels at once. At first glance, Markarth is striking, built directly into ancient Dwemer stone. It feels less like a city that was constructed, and more like one that was discovered and then occupied. The clean, geometric architecture of the Dwemer clashes with the rough, human elements layered on top of it. Water flows unnaturally through the city, machinery hums quietly in the background, and there's a constant sense that the place wasn't meant for the people currently living in it. That alone creates a subtle unease. You're not just in a city, you're in something older, something that doesn't quite belong to the present. But the confusion really begins the moment you arrive. Before you even take in your surroundings, you witness a public murder in the marketplace. It's sudden, unavoidable, and immediately followed by a guard handing you a note that pulls you into a conspiracy you don't yet understand. This sets the tone for Markarth perfectly. There's no introduction, no easing in, just an immediate sense that something is wrong beneath the surface, and that you've already been pulled into it whether you like it or not. From there, everything starts to unravel. The city is controlled by the Silverblood family, who present themselves as powerful and respectable, but quickly reveal themselves to be deeply corrupt. They have influence over the guards, control over the mines, and even a presence within the prison system. But their power doesn't feel stable. It feels aggressive, like it's constantly being asserted rather than naturally maintained. You're told they run the city, but the way they operate makes it feel like they're barely holding onto control. At the same time, the Forsworn loom over everything. They're described as savages, rebels, outsiders, a constant threat to the safety of the Reach. But the deeper you dig, the less clear that label becomes. The Forsworn aren't just random attackers. They have history here. They were here before the Nords took Markarth, and depending on who you listen to, their actions start to feel less like mindless violence and more like resistance. And that's where the confusion really sets in, because Markarth doesn't give you a clear side to stand on. The Silverbloods are undeniably corrupt. The Forsworn are undeniably violent. The guards enforce order, but that order feels compromised. Every faction within the city feels flawed, incomplete, or misleading in some way. There's no clean narrative, no obvious truth, just overlapping perspectives that never fully line up. Even the prison, Sidna Mine, reflects this. When you're sent there, often against your will, it becomes clear that the justice system in Markarth is more about control than fairness. Prisoners aren't just serving time, they're being used, exploited, and in some cases silenced. And yet, even within the prison, there are layers of complexity as well. Madanak, the leader of the Forsworn, represents his own version of events, one that directly contradicts what you've been told up to that point. And again, the game doesn't give you a definite answer. It just adds another perspective. This constant shifting of the truth is what makes Markarth so disorientating. You're never entirely sure who's right, who's lying, or who's simply telling a version of events that benefits them. Information feels unreliable. Authority feels questionable. Even your own role in the city becomes unclear as you're pulled between different sides without ever committing to one. Then there's the Dwemer aspect. Unlike other Dwemer ruins, which are typically separate from modern settlements, Markarth is built directly into one. That means the mystery of the Dwemer isn't something you explore in isolation. It's literally woven into everyday life. People live in their structures, use their systems, and walk their halls without fully understanding them. The city exists on top of a civilization that disappeared without explanation. And that unanswered question lingers in everything. Why build a city here? Why rely on structures you don't understand? Why does it all still work? These questions don't have answers, but they add to the overall sense that Markarth is not a place built on stable foundations, physically or narratively. Even the layout of the city contributes to this feeling. It's vertical, uneven, and easy to get lost in. Staircases lead to unexpected places. Paths loop back in on themselves. It doesn't flow like other cities in Skyrim. It feels almost intentionally disorientating, as if the design itself is reinforcing the confusion of everything happening within it. And maybe that's the point. Because Markarth isn't just confusing in one way. It's politically confusing, morally confusing, historically confusing, even spatially confusing. Every layer of the city adds to a larger sense that nothing here is as straightforward as it should be. And in the end, what makes Markarth one of the most confusing places in Skyrim isn't that it lacks clarity, it's that it presents too many conflicting versions of it. It's a city built on someone else's ruins, controlled by people you can't trust, threatened by enemies who might not be entirely wrong, and filled with systems that don't quite function the way they're supposed to. And no matter how long you spend there, it never fully makes sense. Some locations in Skyrim are confusing because of their politics, others because of their history. But Shriekwind Bastion is confusing in a much quieter, more disorientating way. It's the kind of place you can clear in a single visit and still walk away feeling like you missed something important, not because it's especially large or complex, but because it never fully explains what it is, why it exists in its current state, or how all of its pieces are meant to fit together. It sits high in the mountains between Falkreath and the Rift, isolated and easy to overlook, and yet when you actually take the time to explore it, it feels strangely layered, like multiple ideas were placed on top of each other without ever being fully resolved. At its core, Shriekwind Bastion is a Nordic ruin. You see it in the stonework, the structure, the familiar presence of Draga deeper within its halls. That alone should make it straightforward. Nordic ruins tend to follow a pattern. Ancient burial sites filled with undead guardians, built to honour or protect something from the past. But Shriekwind Bastion doesn't fully commit to that identity, because almost immediately, that expectation is interrupted by something else entirely. Vampires. Not hidden away as a small intrusion, not tucked into a corner of the ruin, but actively occupying the space, reshaping it into something that feels more like a lair than a tomb. Coffins are scattered throughout, bloodstains replace the usual dust and decay, and the atmosphere shifts from ancient to predatory. It's not just that vampires are present, it's that they've claimed the location in a way that feels complete, as if the ruin has been repurposed entirely. Because Shriekwind Bastion never explains how or why this happened. Was this a strategic location for vampires, chosen for its isolation and elevation? Did they discover the ruin by chance, or were they drawn to something within it? Were the Draga always here, or did their presence come after? The game never tells you. Instead, you're left to navigate a space where two completely different identities coexist without clear connection. On one level, it's a Nordic burial site, tied to Skyrim's ancient past. On another, it's an active vampire stronghold, tied to a much more immediate and personal threat. But the transition between those two states is never shown. It just exists. That lack of transition makes the location feel incomplete in a very specific way. Most places in Skyrim, even the more mysterious ones, give you some kind of narrative thread to follow. A journal, a quest, a piece of dialogue, something that helps you understand what happened. Shriekwind Bastion offers very little of that. There's not really a central story guiding your exploration. No clear event that defines the space. Just fragments of two different ideas layered on top of each other. Even the layout contributes to this feeling. The Bastion is split into multiple sections, with separate entrances and pathways that don't always connect in intuitive ways. You can enter from one side and clear a portion of it, only to realise that later there's another section entirely, accessible from a different point on the mountain. It doesn't flow like a single cohesive dungeon. It feels segmented, like pieces of a larger design that was never fully stitched together. And because of that, it's easy to leave thinking you've seen everything, when you really actually haven't. That kind of design creates a subtle but persistent uncertainty. You're never entirely sure if you've fully understood the space, or if there's something you overlooked. And because the game doesn't push you back in, doesn't give you a reason to return, that uncertainty lingers. There's also something strange about the tone of the location. Vampire lairs in Skyrim tend to lean heavily into a specific atmosphere, dark, oppressive, almost theatrical in their presentation. They feel intentional, crafted to reflect the nature of the creatures that inhabit them. Nordic ruins, on the other hand, carry a different kind of weight. Quiet, ancient, rooted in history and ritual. Shriekwind Bastion tries to hold both of these tones at once, and the result is something that never fully settles into either. It's not as grand or ritualistic as other Nordic tombs. It's not as focused or stylized as other vampire dens. It sits somewhere in between, and that in-between space is what makes it feel so off. Even the name Shriekwind Bastion adds to the confusion. It suggests something dramatic, like the very first vampire, whose screams are often heard throughout Skyrim, a stronghold shaped by the environment, defined by the wind and the isolation. And while the location does sit high in the mountains, exposed and distant, that idea is never fully realised in the design or storytelling. The name does imply significance, but the experience doesn't quite deliver on it. And that disconnect sticks with you, because Shriekwind Bastion feels like it should mean more than it does. Like there's a story here that was never fully told, a connection that was never fully explored, a purpose that was never clearly defined. It's not empty, it's actually far from it. There are enemies, loot, environmental details. It functions as a dungeon in every mechanical sense. But narratively, it feels unfinished. Not in a broken way, but in a way that leaves gaps, spaces where something could have been, but isn't. And those gaps are what makes it confusing, because your mind tries to fill them in. You start to create your own explanations. Maybe the vampires discovered the ruin and drove out whatever was there before. Maybe they're using it for something specific, something the game doesn't show. Maybe the separation of its sections is intentional, reflecting different periods of use. But none of that is confirmed. It's all speculation, built on a foundation that never fully supports it. In a game as detailed and interconnected as Skyrim, that stands out. Most locations, even minor ones, feel like they belong to the world in a clear way. They have context, purpose, and a sense of place within the larger narrative. Shriekwind Bastion feels like it exists just outside of that clarity, not disconnected, but not fully integrated either. And that's what makes it one of the most confusing places in the game. Not because it's complicated, but because it feels like it's missing something. Something just out of reach. Something that would make it all make sense. But it never really quite arrives. There are places in Skyrim that are confusing because of how they are built. And then there are places that are confusing because of what they are. The Soul Khan falls firmly into that secondary category. It's not just a location you explore, it's a concept you're forced to navigate, a realm that doesn't follow the same rules as the rest of the game, either mechanically or narratively. Introduced in the Dawnguard expansion, the Soul Khan immediately feels different from anything else in Skyrim, not just darker or more dangerous, but fundamentally wrong. And the more time you spend there, the less certain you become about how it works, why it exists in the way it does, and what your presence there actually means. On a surface level, the Soul Khan is a plane of oblivion, a realm controlled by the Ideal Masters, mysterious entities who trade in souls. That explanation gives you a basic framework, something to hold on to. But it doesn't take long for that framework to start breaking down. Because unlike other Daedric realms in Skyrim which tend to reflect the personality or domain of a specific prince, the Soul Khan feels abstract. There's no clear ruler you interact with, no defined purpose beyond the vague idea of souls being stored and traded. The Ideal Masters exist, but only as distant floating forms, barely present, barely understandable. They don't speak in ways that clarify anything. They don't guide you. They don't even fully acknowledge you. And that distance creates an immediate sense of disorientation. Because you're not just in a foreign place. You're in a system that you don't understand. The environment itself reinforces that feeling. The Soul Khan is vast, open, and eerily empty. But not in a peaceful way. It's a kind of emptiness that feels intentional, like space has been stretched out beyond what it should be. Structures appear without clear purpose. Pathways lead to nothing. Landmarks exist, but they don't anchor you in any meaningful way. You can see far into the distance, but that visibility doesn't help you orient yourself. If anything, it makes the space feel even more unnatural. It's not designed to be navigated comfortably. It's designed to make you feel lost. And that feeling is only amplified by the inhabitants. The souls trapped within the Khan are not presented in a consistent or easily understood way. Some appear as wandering figures, repeating fragments of dialogue that hint at regret, confusion, or anger. Others are bound to specific locations, tied to the deals they made in life that they clearly didn't fully understand. Then there are entities like the Keepers and Wraithmen, which seem to enforce some kind of order, but without ever explaining what that order is meant to achieve. Nothing about it feels structured. Clearly, there are rules, but you're never fully told what they are. You just experience the consequences of them. Even the central premise of this place, that souls are traded here in exchange for power, raises more questions than it answers. Who is making these deals? How are they enforced? Why do the Ideal Masters want these souls in the first place? The game gives you pieces of this information, but never enough to form a complete picture. It's implied that necromancers and other magic users can bargain with the Ideal Masters, offering souls in exchange for knowledge or power. But the mechanics of that exchange are left intentionally vague. And that vagueness creates a kind of narrative instability, because you're constantly trying to understand something that resists being understood. Serana's presence in the Soul Khan adds another layer to this confusion. As someone directly tied to the events that allow you to enter the realm, she provides context, but even her understanding is limited as well. She knows of the Soul Khan, but not everything about it. Her familiarity doesn't translate into clarity. Instead, it reinforces the idea that this is a place beyond even the knowledge of those who have studied it. Then there's Valerica, Serana's mother, who has chosen to remain in the Soul Khan rather than return to the world of the living. Her decision makes sense on a surface level. She's hiding from Harkon. But the fact that the Soul Khan is considered a viable refuge raises even more questions. Why is this place, which is clearly hostile and unstable, safer than the world outside? What does that say about both the Khan and the threats beyond it? It blurs the line between prison and sanctuary. And that's a recurring theme throughout the entire experience, because the soul Khan is never clearly defined as one or the other. It traps souls, but it also houses them. It punishes, but it also preserves. It feels like a place of torment, but not in a way that's fully intentional or directed. It's not hell, at least not in the traditional sense. There's no judgment, no moral framework guiding who ends up there. Souls are collected, not condemned. And that distinction makes the entire realm feel colder, more mechanical. Even the quest structure within the Soul Khan contributes to this sense of confusion. Objectives are often vague, spread out across a massive disorientating landscape. You're asked to find specific figures, objects, or locations, but the process of doing so rarely feels guided. You wander, you search, you piece things together as you go. And while that can create a strong sense of immersion, it also reinforces the idea that you're operating without a full understanding of the space you're in. You're not mastering the Soul Khan, you're surviving it. And maybe that's the point, because the Soul Khan isn't meant to be fully understood. It's meant to feel alien, disconnected, like a system that exists entirely outside of human logic. In a game where most mysteries can eventually be unraveled, where most locations can be understood through exploration and context, the Soul Khan stands apart. It resists that process. It gives you just enough information to function, but never enough to feel comfortable. And when you finally leave, there's a lingering sense that you didn't really solve anything. You just got out, which makes it one of the most confusing places in all of Skyrim. Not because it's poorly explained, but because it's intentionally, fundamentally unknowable. Skyrim is usually a world that rewards understanding. You explore, you piece things together, and eventually it all makes sense. But places like Markarth, Shriekwind Bastion, and the Soul Khan don't really follow that rule. They give you information, just not enough. They show you structure, but not intention. They tell stories that never fully connect. And that's what makes them stick, because you don't leave these places feeling satisfied. You leave them thinking about what you missed, what didn't quite add up, what might be hiding just beneath the surface. In a game full of clear paths and defined outcomes, these are the places that feel unfinished in the best way. Not broken, just unresolved. And sometimes that lingering confusion is far more memorable than any clear answer could ever be.